"You're bigger than my house," the quiet surveyor marveled as the 8-foot giant stepped down from the dusty stagecoach. But when the sneering broker shoved the trembling woman forward like livestock, tears streamed down her dark face. The frontier town gawked and whispered, children fled, merchants slammed doors shut. She was a spectacle, a curiosity bought and paid for. Her fate seemed sealed, a life of servitude under fraudulent contracts, dismissed as too strange, too different to matter. But the soft-spoken surveyor saw something others missed, approaching when all others turned away, recognizing intelligence behind her tears. What he couldn't know was that her unusual gift could save them all, or that his own hidden mission would determine whether she'd find freedom or remain forever trapped. Would their unlikely alliance expose the truth before the town's cruelty destroyed them both? Pearl Thompson stepped off the stagecoach into the blazing sun of Red Rock Bluffs. At 8 feet tall, she towered over every soul gathered in the dusty street. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wildfire. The mail-order broker, Silas Rooker, grabbed her arm roughly. His weathered face showed nothing but contempt as he pulled her forward. Pearl stumbled, her enormous frame awkward under the weight of stares and sneers. Children scattered behind their mothers' skirts. Shopkeepers peered from doorways with narrowed eyes. A group of cowboys pointed and laughed from the saloon porch. Bartholomew Crane emerged from the crowd. His expensive boots kicked up dust as he circled Pearl like a rancher inspecting cattle. His cold eyes appraised her height, her strength, her obvious discomfort. "She'll do fine for the heavy work," Crane announced to no one in particular. Pearl's hands trembled. This wasn't what the advertisement had promised. No loving home, no partnership, just more judgment, more isolation. From across the street, Jonathan McGraw watched quietly from his surveyor's office. Unlike the others, his expression held curiosity rather than disgust. He set down his measuring tools and stepped onto the wooden walkway. The general store owner, Mrs. Patterson, emerged with a broom. She swept aggressively near Pearl's feet, forcing her to step backward. "Don't want any trouble in this town," Patterson muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. Pearl pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The fabric barely covered her massive frame. Every eye in the street remained fixed on her, waiting for something to happen. Rooker produced a thick stack of papers from his coat. "Sign here, Crane. The contract's ironclad." Crane scanned the documents briefly. "Says here she works until she earns her keep. Could be years. Could be forever," Rooker replied with a thin smile. Pearl's head snapped up. "That's not what I was told. You promised me a home, a family." The crowd snickered. A woman her size talking about family seemed absurd to them. "You'll get what you've earned," Crane said flatly. "Nothing more." Jonathan stepped closer, his boots clicking softly on the wooden planks. The crowd parted slightly to let him through. His quiet presence commanded a different kind of respect in town. "Ma'am," he said simply, tipping his hat to Pearl. The gesture sent another ripple through the gathered townsfolk. No one had addressed her with basic courtesy since her arrival. Pearl looked down at him, surprised. This soft-spoken man seemed genuinely interested in treating her like a human being. "You must be tired from your journey," Jonathan continued. "Long way from wherever you came from." "Missouri," Pearl replied quietly. "The missionary school there. Educated then." Jonathan's tone held no mockery. "That's good. This territory needs more educated folks." Crane stepped between them. "She's not here for socializing, McGraw. She's got work to do." "Course she does," Jonathan replied mildly. "Just being neighborly." The crowd began to disperse, disappointed that no drama had unfolded. But their whispers continued as they retreated to shops and saloons. Pearl followed Crane toward his ranch wagon. Her enormous stride covered ground quickly, but she kept her head down, avoiding the remaining stairs. "Wait in the wagon," Crane ordered. "I've got business to finish." Pearl climbed onto the wooden seat. The wagon creaked under her weight. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, trying to make herself as small as possible. Jonathan approached the wagon casually. He pretended to examine the wheel spokes while speaking quietly. "Things ain't always what they seem when you first arrive somewhere," he said. "Sometimes takes time to see how a place really works." Pearl glanced down at him. His words carried weight beyond their surface meaning. "Sometimes a place needs time to see how a person really works too," she replied carefully. Jonathan nodded. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that both were outsiders in their own ways. Crane returned with Rooker. They shook hands firmly, sealing whatever arrangement they'd made. "She's your problem now," Rooker said, mounting his horse. "Contract's clear about the terms." As the wagon rolled away from town, Pearl caught one last glimpse of Jonathan. He stood in the street, watching her departure with thoughtful eyes. The ranch appeared as a collection of weathered buildings against the endless prairie. Crane pointed to a small shed behind the main house. "Your quarters," he announced. "You'll start work at dawn. Livestock need tending, fields need clearing, and there's plenty more where that came from." Pearl ducked through the shed's doorway. Inside, a thin mattress lay on the dirt floor. A single blanket, nothing else. She sat heavily on the mattress, feeling its springs compress under her weight. Through the small window, she could see the lights of Red Rock Bluffs twinkling in the distance. For the first time since leaving Missouri, Pearl allowed herself to cry. But even through her tears, she thought about the quiet surveyor's words. Sometimes it took time to see how things really worked. She had no way of knowing that her time was coming sooner than anyone expected. If you are enjoying this story of how one woman's arrival will change a frontier town forever, don't forget to comment where you are tuning in from to show how this story can connect us across any distances, backgrounds, and hearts. Because what will happen in the next 15 minutes in Red Rock Bluffs will completely change everything Pearl thought she knew about survival. 3 days later, Crane dragged Pearl into the center of Red Rock Bluffs. He'd gathered half the town to witness what he called his investment announcement. Pearl stood in the dusty street, her massive frame casting shadows over the assembled crowd. Children hid behind their parents. Adults whispered and pointed without shame. "This here's my new ranch hand," Crane declared loudly. "Strongest worker this territory's ever seen. She'll be earning her keep for years to come." Rooker stood beside him, holding the contract papers like a trophy. "Legal and binding. She works until every debt is paid." Pearl's stomach twisted. The debt kept growing each day. Food, shelter, clothing. Everything came with a price that pushed freedom further away. Jonathan watched from his office doorway. His jaw tightened at Crane's public humiliation of Pearl. This wasn't how decent people treated anyone, regardless of size or circumstance. "What kind of work can something like that even do?" Mrs. Patterson called out. "Heavy lifting, field clearing, anything that needs real strength," Crane replied. "Better than hiring 3 regular men." Pearl felt heat rise in her cheeks. They spoke about her like she couldn't hear every word. The crowd dispersed slowly, leaving Pearl standing alone in the street. Crane had returned to the saloon. Rooker was nowhere to be seen. Jonathan approached carefully. "Ma'am, you look like you could use some water." Pearl nodded gratefully. The sun blazed overhead, and her throat felt like sandpaper. Jonathan led her to the public well. He worked the pump handle while she drank deeply from the metal cup. "Where I come from, folks treat each other with more respect," Pearl said quietly. "Where'd you grow up?" "Missionary orphanage outside St. Louis, place called Haven's Rest." Jonathan continued pumping water. Something in his expression shifted. "Tell me about it." Pearl's eyes grew distant. "Brother Marcus ran the place. Good man, took in kids nobody else wanted." She paused, remembering. "Had this groundskeeper Thomas Crow Feather. Cheyenne fellow who knew things about the land." "What kind of things?" "Weather mostly. Said the earth talks if you know how to listen." Jonathan stopped pumping. His surveyor's mind was trained to notice details others missed. "He taught you?" Pearl nodded. "Started when I was 12. Thomas said my height was a gift, not a curse. Could feel pressure changes others couldn't sense." Dark clouds began gathering on the western horizon. Pearl's head snapped toward them instantly. "Storm's coming," she said with certainty. Jonathan glanced at the sky. The clouds looked ordinary to him. "When?" Tonight, big one too. Wind's gonna be fierce. She'd been tracking the atmospheric pressure for 2 days. Her body responded to changes like a living barometer. The ache in her joints, the tingling in her fingertips, the way her breath felt different. All signs Thomas had taught her to read. How can you tell? Pearl touched her temple. Pressure's dropping fast. Birds stopped singing an hour ago. Feel that stillness in the air. Jonathan paid attention now. The usual prairie breeze had indeed stopped. An eerie calm settled over the town. By evening, Pearl's prediction proved accurate. Wind howled through red rock bluffs like a living thing. Rain hammered the buildings in sheets. Crane's ranch house groaned under the assault. Pearl huddled in her shed, listening to the storm's fury. But something felt wrong. This wasn't the peak yet. The pressure continued dropping. Her head pounded with the change. Thomas had taught her to trust these sensations completely. She burst from the shed and ran toward town. The storm was intensifying beyond normal patterns. People were in danger. Main Street looked deserted, but lights glowed in windows. Families hunkered down, believing the worst had passed. Pearl knew better. Jonathan emerged from his office, struggling against the wind. He spotted Pearl's massive silhouette moving through the storm. "Get everyone to the church," she shouted over the howling wind. "This storm's got more bite left." "How do you know?" "Trust me, we got maybe 10 minutes. Jonathan had spent enough time reading Pearl's character to recognize certainty when he heard it. He began pounding on doors, shouting warnings. Most folks ignored him initially. The storm seemed to be weakening. Why leave warm houses for a cold church? Then Pearl's voice cut through the night like thunder. "Lightning's about to dance across this whole street. Anyone staying put is gonna regret it." Her commanding tone brooked no argument. Something in her voice carried absolute authority. Families began emerging reluctantly. Parents grabbed children and ran for the church building. The solid stone structure offered better protection than wooden shops and houses. Pearl positioned herself in the street, head tilted skyward. Her body read the storm like a book. She pointed toward the blacksmith shop. "That building's getting hit first." 30 seconds later, lightning struck exactly where she'd indicated. The wooden structure burst into flames despite the driving rain. Gasps echoed from the church doorway. Pearl had predicted the strike with impossible precision. "Hardware stores next," she called out. Another lightning bolt confirmed her accuracy. Jonathan stared in amazement. Pearl wasn't guessing. She was reading the storm's intentions like text on a page. For the next hour, Pearl guided the entire town through nature's assault. She predicted wind direction changes, lightning strikes, even the exact moment the rain would stop. When dawn broke clear and calm, Red Rock Bluffs had suffered minimal damage. No injuries, no deaths. Only property losses Pearl had accurately predicted and helped minimize. The town gathered in the street, looking at Pearl with new eyes. Fear had transformed into something approaching awe. Crane pushed through the crowd, his face twisted with confusion. How'd she know all that? Pearl stood tall, no longer trying to make herself small. Her tears had dried. Her voice carried newfound strength. "Thomas Crow Feather taught me to listen when the sky talks. Last night it had plenty to say." Jonathan stepped forward. "Seems like Pearl's got skills this territory could use." The crowd murmured agreement. Their giant was becoming something else entirely. Something valuable. Word of Pearl's weather prediction spread through Red Rock Bluffs like wildfire. By noon, farmers lined up outside Crane's ranch seeking her counsel. "When's the next rain coming?" asked old Pete, his weathered hands gripping his hat. "My corn's dying out there." Pearl studied the sky carefully. The pressure felt stable now, but subtle changes whispered of future patterns. 3 days. Morning rain, light but steady. Should last about 6 hours. Pete nodded and left a silver coin on the fence post before walking away. Crane watched the exchange with growing irritation. "You don't talk to anyone without my say-so. That prediction comes through me." "The sky doesn't belong to you," Pearl replied firmly. More visitors arrived throughout the day, merchants planning supply runs, ranchers worried about livestock. families preparing for outdoor celebrations. Pearl answered each question with precision. Her confidence grew with every interaction. These people needed her knowledge, not her brute strength. Jonathan documented each prediction in his surveyor's notebook. He'd begun tracking Pearl's accuracy from the moment he witnessed her storm reading. "How far ahead can you predict?" he asked during a quiet moment. "Depends. Big storms maybe a week, daily weather 3 or 4 days usually." "That's remarkable. Most folks barely know what's happening in the next hour." Pearl smiled for the first time since arriving in Red Rock Bluffs. "Thomas used to say I was born with sky eyes, could see what was coming before it knew itself." The memory brought both joy and sadness. Thomas had been the only person who'd ever valued her differences. That evening, Crane confronted her in the shed. His face was flushed with anger and whiskey. "You're drawing too much attention. People are starting to think you're something special." "Maybe I am something special." Crane's hand moved toward his belt. Pearl tensed, ready to defend herself if necessary. "Your property until that debt's paid. Don't forget it." But Pearl no longer felt like property. The town's respect had awakened something inside her that years of isolation had nearly killed. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. A traveling preacher and his family had heard about the giant woman who could read God's skies. Reverend Thompson approached with his wife and young daughter. Unlike other townspeople, they showed no fear or disgust. "Sister, we've come to ask about tomorrow's weather, planning a baptism down by the creek." Pearl closed her eyes and let her senses expand. The atmospheric pressure remained steady. No storms building anywhere within her range. Clear skies all day, perfect for a baptism. The Reverend's wife smiled warmly. "The Lord works in mysterious ways." "Thank you, sister." Their daughter, maybe 8 years old, stared up at Pearl with pure fascination rather than fear. "Are you really 8 feet tall?" the girl asked innocently. "Close enough," Pearl replied gently. "My daddy says God makes everyone exactly the size they need to be." Those simple words hit Pearl like lightning. For 26 years, she'd seen her height as a burden. Maybe it was actually her purpose. More families approached throughout the week. Pearl's predictions proved accurate every time. Farmers saved crops by following her rainfall forecasts. Travelers avoided dangerous storms by heeding her warnings. Jonathan watched the transformation with deep admiration. Pearl carried herself differently now. Taller, if that was possible, more assured in her movements and decisions. "You're becoming the most important person in this territory," he observed. "Feels strange. Back at Haven's Rest, I was always the odd one, too big, too different." "Different doesn't mean wrong. Sometimes it means necessary." Pearl began charging for her services. Small fees, but they added up quickly. For the first time in her life, she possessed real economic power. Crane noticed the money immediately. "Hand over those coins. They're paying for my property's services. They're paying for my knowledge. Knowledge you didn't buy and don't own." The confrontation escalated quickly. Crane grabbed for the money pouch at Pearl's waist. Pearl's massive hand closed around his wrist with gentle but unmovable force. "Don't." Her voice carried quiet authority that stopped Crane cold. He found himself staring up into eyes that no longer held fear or uncertainty. "You can't keep me here forever," Pearl continued. "These people need what I offer. They'll pay for it regardless of what your contract says." Crane pulled free and stalked away, but Pearl could see the calculation in his expression. He was planning something. Jonathan witnessed the entire exchange. "He's not going to give up easily. Then we better be ready for whatever he's planning." That afternoon brought Pearl's biggest test yet. A family of settlers approached in obvious distress. "Please, miss, our boy's been missing 2 days. We think he might be lost in the hills somewhere." Pearl studied the western mountains where storm systems typically formed. Her senses detected something troubling building beyond the peaks. "There's weather coming from that direction. Bad weather. If he's out there, he needs shelter soon." "How soon?" Pearl felt the familiar pressure changes in her bones. This storm would be worse than the one that had first revealed her abilities. Tomorrow night, maybe sooner. The family organized a search party immediately. Pearl's warning carried weight now. People trusted her completely. As the searchers prepared to leave, Pearl made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. "I'm coming with you," Jonathan stepped forward. "Pearl, if you're right about this storm, then they need someone who can read it coming, someone who can keep them safe while they find their boy." Crane appeared suddenly, his face dark with fury. "You're not going anywhere, we had an agreement." Pearl looked down at him with complete calm. "We had a lie, I'm done living it." She walked toward the search party, leaving Crane sputtering behind her. The giant was taking control of her own story. The search party found the missing boy just as Pearl's predicted storm arrived. Her precise timing had guided them to shelter in a cave system, keeping everyone safe through the night. By morning, Pearl's reputation had transformed completely. Parents approached her with their children, no longer afraid but grateful. She'd become the town's guardian angel. "Miss Pearl, when should we plant the winter wheat?" asked Farmer Jenkins. Pearl consulted the atmospheric patterns building in her mind. "Wait 2 weeks. There's a cold snap coming first." Jenkins nodded and handed her payment without question. Her weather service had become essential to the territory's survival. Jonathan watched the transformation with quiet satisfaction. He'd been documenting everything in his surveyor's notebook, but his entries went far beyond simple weather predictions. "You're keeping detailed records," Pearl observed during a break between consultations. "Important to track accuracy. People trust you completely now." That responsibility weighs heavy sometimes. Jonathan understood the burden. His own secrets carried similar weight. Word traveled to neighboring towns about the giant weather prophet of Red Rock Bluffs. Visitors arrived daily seeking Pearl's guidance for their own communities. Crane grew increasingly agitated, watching his supposed property operate independently. The money Pearl earned far exceeded what he'd paid for her fraudulent contract. "This ends now," he announced during one of Pearl's public consultations. "She belongs to me." The gathered crowd turned hostile immediately. Pearl had saved their crops, their livestock, their lives. No one wanted to see her return to servitude. "She's free to work as she pleases," declared Mrs. Patterson, the same woman who'd swept aggressively at Pearl's feet weeks earlier. The tide of public opinion had shifted completely. Pearl stood at the center of it, no longer a curiosity but a beloved community member. That evening, Rooker returned to town unexpectedly. He brought reinforcements, 2 men in official-looking uniforms and a stack of legal papers. "Contract violation," Rooker announced loudly in the saloon. "The woman owes significant debt. She'll be transferred to more suitable arrangements." Jonathan overheard the conversation from across the room. His jaw tightened with controlled anger. This was exactly what he'd been investigating. "What kind of arrangements?" asked the bartender. "Labor camp up north. Plenty of work for someone her size." The words sent chills through everyone listening. Labor camps were little better than prisons. Pearl would disappear forever. Jonathan slipped out of the saloon and found Pearl at her small cabin behind the church. She'd used her earnings to rent proper accommodations, leaving Crane's shed behind. "Rooker's back. He's got papers to move you north." Pearl's face hardened. "I won't go. Might not be your choice. He's brought official backing." "Then we need to find another way." Jonathan hesitated. His cover story had served him well, but Pearl's situation demanded truth. "There might be, but I need to tell you something first." Pearl studied his expression carefully. She'd sensed Jonathan was more than a simple surveyor from their first meeting. "I'm listening. I'm not just documenting your weather predictions. I'm building a case." "What kind of case?" Jonathan pulled out his notebook, revealing pages of detailed observations about fraudulent contracts, exploited women, and corrupt officials. "Rooker's been running this operation across multiple territories. You're not his first victim." Pearl's eyes widened. "How many others?" "At least dozen that I've found, maybe more." "And you've been investigating this whole time?" Jonathan nodded. "Territorial government sent me, but I needed solid evidence before making arrests." Pearl felt betrayal and relief in equal measure. Jonathan had been honest about caring for her welfare, but he'd hidden his true purpose. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Couldn't risk exposing the investigation. Too many officials are compromised." "But you're telling me now." "Because Rooker's forcing my hand. If I don't act soon, you'll be gone." That night, Pearl couldn't sleep. Her weather senses detected no atmospheric disturbances, but human storms were building all around her. She'd found purpose and respect in Red Rock Bluffs. The thought of losing it to fraudulent paperwork filled her with rage. The next morning brought more troubling news. Other women began approaching Pearl quietly, sharing their own stories of deceptive contracts and impossible debts. Sarah Mitchell, who worked at the hotel, had been promised marriage but forced into unpaid labor. Her supposed husband treated her like a servant. Mary Chen, brought from California, discovered her family reunification was actually indentured servitude at the laundry. Each story followed the same pattern: false promises, fraudulent contracts, and impossible escape. "How many of us are there?" Sarah asked during a secret meeting in Pearl's cabin. "More than we realized," Pearl replied grimly. Jonathan attended the gathering, his surveyor's notebook now serving its true purpose. He recorded each testimony carefully. "This is exactly what I needed," he told the group. "Your stories prove the pattern of systematic fraud." "What happens next?" asked Mary. "We expose everything publicly, but timing has to be perfect." Pearl studied the women gathered in her small cabin. They'd all been chosen because they seemed powerless, too foreign, too poor, too different to fight back. "They picked the wrong victims," she said with quiet determination. Jonathan smiled grimly. "That's exactly what I was thinking." Outside, storm clouds gathered naturally on the horizon. Pearl's senses detected a significant weather event approaching in 3 days, perfect timing for what they had in mind. "There's a harvest festival planned for Saturday," Pearl announced. "Whole territory will be watching." "Ideal opportunity," Jonathan agreed. The women exchanged looks of nervous excitement. They'd been hiding in shadows for too long. The giant weather prophet was about to predict a very different kind of storm. Saturday's harvest festival drew crowds from across 3 territories. Pearl's weather prediction had guaranteed perfect conditions, and people traveled for days to attend the celebration. Jonathan positioned himself near the main platform where speeches would be given. His surveyor's tools were arranged carefully, but today they served a different purpose entirely. Pearl stood among the crowd, her massive frame impossible to miss. Children who once fled from her now tugged at her skirts, begging for weather predictions about their upcoming adventures. "Will it rain on my birthday next week?" asked little Emma Thompson. Pearl smiled gently. "Clear skies and sunshine. Perfect party weather." The interaction drew warm smiles from nearby adults. Pearl had become beloved, which made what was about to happen even more powerful. Territorial officials had arrived that morning, though most people assumed they were simply enjoying the festival. Jonathan had carefully orchestrated their presence without arousing suspicion. Crane and Rooker worked the crowd nervously. They sensed something building but couldn't identify the threat. Pearl's growing independence had them on edge for weeks. "We should move her today," Rooker whispered to Crane. "Too many people asking questions. After the festival, don't want to cause a scene." They had no idea the scene was already in motion. Jonathan climbed onto the speaking platform during the afternoon program. Most people expected weather reports or surveying updates from him. "Friends, I've got something important to share about our community." The crowd quieted respectfully. Jonathan's soft-spoken nature commanded attention when he chose to speak publicly. "I came to Red Rock Bluffs on assignment from the territorial government, not to survey land, but to investigate reports of contract fraud." Murmurs rippled through the gathering. This wasn't what anyone expected to hear at a harvest celebration. Rooker's face went white. He began edging toward the crowd's perimeter, but found his path blocked by territorial marshals who'd been positioned strategically. "What I discovered goes far beyond simple fraud," Jonathan continued. We're dealing with systematic human trafficking disguised as legitimate business. Pearl stepped forward, her towering presence parting the crowd like water. She climbed onto the platform beside Jonathan, no longer hiding or trying to make herself small. My name is Pearl Thompson, she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the festival grounds. I was brought here under false pretenses and forced into unpaid labor through fraudulent contracts. Gasps echoed from people who'd come to respect and depend on Pearl. The idea of anyone exploiting her seemed unthinkable now. I'm not the only victim, Pearl continued. Many women in this territory have been trapped the same way. Sarah Mitchell emerged from the crowd, followed by Mary Chen and three other women Jonathan had interviewed. Each carried documentation of their fraudulent contracts. Crane pushed forward desperately. This is all lies. These women owe legitimate debts. Show them the real contracts, Jonathan called out. Territorial marshals produced boxes of evidence seized from Rooker's office. Document after document revealed the systematic deception. False promises, inflated debts, and impossible terms designed to trap victims permanently. The marriage advertisements were fake, Sarah testified. I was promised a loving husband but delivered to unpaid kitchen work. The family reunification papers were forged, added Mary. No family connection existed. Each testimony built upon the last, painting a clear picture of organized criminality that had operated for years across multiple territories. Rooker made one final attempt to control the situation. These women signed legal contracts. They owe payment for transportation, housing, and care. Jonathan produced his surveyor's notebook, now revealed as a federal investigation record. Let's examine those transportation costs. $50 per person for a $15 stagecoach ride. Housing costs of $20 monthly for shed accommodations worth $2. The mathematical fraud was obvious to everyone listening. The crowd's mood shifted from confusion to anger. Pearl stepped forward again, her massive frame casting shadows across the platform. They chose us because we seemed powerless. Too different, too desperate, too isolated to fight back. Her voice carried the authority she developed through weeks of weather predictions and community service. People listened with complete attention. But they underestimated something important, Pearl continued. This community values contribution over appearance, character over conformity. Applause began slowly and built into thunderous approval. Pearl had saved crops, livestock, and lives with her weather predictions. The crowd wasn't about to let anyone harm her. Territorial marshals moved efficiently through the gathering, arresting Rooker, Crane, and several local officials who'd been accepting bribes. The evidence was overwhelming. All fraudulent contracts are hereby voided, announced the territorial judge who traveled specifically for this moment. Affected women are free citizens with full legal protections. Pearl felt tears on her cheeks, but these were different from the tears she'd cried upon arriving. These came from joy, relief, and something she'd never experienced before, true belonging. Jonathan approached her as the crowd began to disperse. You could go anywhere now. Start fresh wherever you choose. Pearl looked out over the festival grounds where children played games and families shared meals. People waved at her with genuine affection and gratitude. I've already found where I belong. The sun began setting over Red Rock Bluffs, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Pearl's weather senses detected clear conditions for the foreseeable future. Perfect weather for building a new life. The giant had found her true size at last, not in physical measurements, but in the space she occupied in people's hearts and the impact she made on their lives. Tomorrow would bring new weather to predict and new reasons to stand tall. 6 months after the Harvest Festival, Pearl stood in front of her new home, measuring the morning sky. The two-story building rose higher than any other structure in Red Rock Bluffs, built specifically to accommodate her unique proportions. Children gathered outside her fence each morning, eager for daily weather reports before school. Pearl had become their favorite teacher, though she'd never set foot in a formal classroom. "Miss Pearl, will it be good flying weather for my kite today?" asked Tommy Martinez. Pearl studied the atmospheric pressure carefully. Light winds from the southwest, steady throughout the afternoon. Perfect kite weather. Winds will hold steady until sunset. Tommy ran off excitedly to spread the news. Pearl smiled watching him go. These daily interactions filled her heart in ways she'd never expected. Jonathan approached from across the street, carrying official documents and wearing his federal marshal badge openly now. His surveying days had ended when the territorial government offered him a permanent law enforcement position. "Morning reports from the Weather Service," he announced with mock formality. Pearl laughed. Their friendship had deepened into something resembling family. Not romantic love, but the chosen kinship of two people who'd found their purpose together. "3 towns requesting consultation visits this month," Jonathan continued. "Railroad company wants to hire you for their expansion planning." Pearl's weather prediction service had grown beyond anyone's expectations. Her accuracy rate remained perfect, making her the most sought-after consultant in the territory. "Schedule the town visits for next week. The railroad meeting can wait until after harvest season." Her business acumen had developed alongside her confidence. Pearl now negotiated contracts, managed finances, and employed 3 assistants to handle scheduling. Sarah Mitchell emerged from the house carrying ledger books. She'd become Pearl's business manager after discovering a talent for organization and numbers. "Profitable month again," Sarah reported. "Enough to expand the women's shelter and add 2 more classroom spaces." The shelter had become Pearl's greatest pride. Women escaping difficult situations found safety, education, and new opportunities within its walls. Mary Chen taught practical skills like sewing and cooking. Former victims of trafficking had become teachers themselves, turning their survival experiences into wisdom for others. "Any new arrivals this week?" Pearl asked. 2 women from Colorado Territory. Similar stories to what we've seen before." Pearl nodded grimly. Rooker's network had been dismantled, but similar operations continued elsewhere. Her shelter served as both sanctuary and symbol that escape was possible. The territorial government had officially recognized Pearl's weather service, granting her the first female meteorological license in the Western Territories. The certificate hung proudly in her office. Local farmers planned entire seasons around her predictions. Merchants scheduled supply runs according to her travel advisories. Her knowledge had become integral to the region's prosperity. "Miss Pearl," called out Mrs. Patterson from across the street, "storm coming like you predicted. Thank you for the warning." Pearl had forecasted a brief afternoon thundershower 3 days earlier. Families had planned accordingly, bringing in laundry and securing outdoor items. These small daily validations never lost their power. Each successful prediction strengthened the community's trust and Pearl's confidence in her abilities. Jonathan watched Pearl interact with the townspeople, marveling at the transformation. The crying woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach had become a pillar of strength and wisdom. "Town council meeting tonight," he reminded her. "They're voting on the school expansion proposal." Pearl served as the territory's first female council member, appointed unanimously after the trafficking scandal. Her voice carried significant weight in community decisions. "The children need more classroom space," Pearl said firmly. "Education creates opportunities that exploitation can't touch." Her philosophy had been shaped by experience. Knowledge and skills provided independence that no contract could steal away. That evening, the council meeting drew a packed audience. Pearl's height allowed everyone to see her clearly as she spoke about the school expansion's importance. "These children represent our future," she argued. "Investing in their education means investing in a community that values growth over exploitation." The proposal passed unanimously. Construction would begin immediately, funded partly by Pearl's weather service profits. After the meeting, Pearl walked home under a canopy of stars. Her weather senses detected clear conditions for the next several days. Jonathan fell into step beside her, as had become their evening routine. "Remember what you told me when this all started, about finding where you belonged," Pearl nodded. "Feels like a lifetime ago. You've built something remarkable here. Not just the business or the shelter, but the way people see differences now. Thomas Crow Feather used to say everyone has a gift. Sometimes it just takes the right soil for it to grow." They reached Pearl's house, its windows glowing warmly in the darkness. The building stood as testament to what was possible when communities embraced rather than rejected those who were different. A stagecoach appeared on the distant horizon, lanterns swaying in the darkness. Pearl's trained eye could make out details others would miss. "New arrival coming," she observed. "Think they'll find what they're looking for?" Pearl smiled, remembering her own terrifying arrival months earlier. "Depends what they're looking for. If they need acceptance and opportunity, they've come to the right place." The stagecoach rolled closer, carrying unknown passengers toward Red Rock Bluffs. Whatever their stories, they would find a community that had learned to see potential instead of problems. Pearl stood tall in her doorway, no longer trying to make herself smaller. She'd found her true size in the space she occupied in people's lives and the impact she made on their world. The giant had finally come home,